About 2 decades ago, there was a group called Styx, and they would sing a song, their lead singer, Dennis DeYoung, sang, "Show me the way, show me the way, take me tonight to the river and wash my illusions away. Show me the way." Love that song. The purpose of this song was a prayer. It was a prayer of hope in times of night. It was a prayer for heaven. It was a prayer during times of confusion when saints would be sinners, when heroes would fall, and now they look like lumps of clay. It was a prayer in emptiness. It was a prayer in fear for someone who had ultimately lost his faith. Show me the way. Have you ever prayed that short prayer too? Show me the way. You know, we have GPS and Google Maps, compasses and atlases, and they all are there to help us know where we need to go, and we still get lost. We sound a lot like Thomas, who says, "Lord, we don't know the way." I want to know, has anyone ever gotten lost in our church? I'm not talking about coming to church, like in the church. Have you gotten lost in this place? For my first 2 weeks here, I totally got lost every time I walked around. You know, as pastors, we have to go from 8:30 service, we take the robe off, we have to go to our office, we come to the 9:30 service, and then from 9:30 go back to the office and then go into the sanctuary. 3 different places to preach. And I remember my first 2 weeks just literally wandering the halls, and I'd say, "Can somebody tell me where the fellowship hall is?" And they'd say, "Well, you turn left there, you turn left there, then you go through here, and then you turn left again." Thank God for Chuck Irwin and Dave Morris, who literally took me by my hand those first 2 weeks and made sure I ended up in the right place. It took me 3 weeks to find the choir room. And the parlor, I didn't even know we had a parlor. I was trying to get out the building. Oh, look at this room. Has anybody found the parlor here? I mean, this is a whole room that most of y'all have never even know exists. I get lost in this place still sometimes. What about when you don't just get lost in the house of faith, but when you get lost in your faith? It's Palm Sunday, and we started this morning with some hosannas, with singing, praise the Lords, and all of that. We read about Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. It's a day filled with excitement, with expectation. God's people have been waiting for a Messiah. They were looking for a deliverer, somebody who would take their people like that hero King David and release them from captivity, revive their hope, make their nation great again, make them a people of might, prosperity. And Jesus, well, he had the same name from that Old Testament root, Joshua. Jesus means he saves. Surely, he's got to be the guy. This is also the week in the life of our church where we take this spiritual journey from Palm Sunday and through Holy Week. It is Jesus' last week of life that we remember. We remember encounters with religious leaders and how they would lead to his last words with his disciples. We remember in just 4 days from Palm Sunday, it was bitter betrayal, denial, arrest, vicious beatings, trial, brutal execution, excruciating death, and burial. The context for today's reading is in that week of activity. It's actually for that Thursday of that week. It was the night that they were celebrating their annual Passover celebration, that very night when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, where he took that cup and that bread and he gave them entirely new vision and meaning. And he spoke that same night about the urgency of his impending death. After the glory of Palm Sunday, the disciples had to be reeling. The week had rapidly devolved, and Jesus was a wanted man along with anyone who was with him. The upper room came to a conclusion, and it had to feel a lot more like a wake than a celebration. Jesus was beginning to sense this anxiety among his friends, and so he gave them these words: "Don't be troubled. Trust God. Trust me." And then he starts talking kind of cryptically about what must have seemed odd about the Father's house, and how there would be mansions, and how there would be enough mansions for them, the implication was I would go there and get it ready, and then I'll come back and get you, and where I'm going, you're going to be also. You know the way. And Thomas again, we don't know the way. And then these words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Today, I'd like to focus in particular on way. I am the way. You see, like my friends Chuck and Dave, who would literally take me from place to place around the church, Jesus doesn't just tell you the way, Jesus shows you the way. And this is needed. It is needed. Earlier in Jesus' final week, we get words from Matthew that describe him at the temple, and he's talking, he's teaching. There are Pharisees, religious leaders all around, and he turns to the people he's teaching to, and he said, you know, these guys, these Pharisees, these teachers, they are scholars. They are competent religious teachers of the law. You will not go wrong in following what they say about Moses. And you can imagine the religious leaders are going, yeah, finally, getting the respect I deserve, and you know. And then he says, but be careful about following them. They talk a good line, but they don't live it. They don't take their message into their hearts and live it out with their behavior. As the Message translation puts it, it's all spit and veneer polish. Uh-oh. You can see how this is starting to deteriorate pretty quickly. Jesus is saying about these leaders, don't do what they say, but don't do what they do. They're going to tell you the way, but they're not going to show you the way. The main point of today's message is this. It has 3 points. Jesus tells you the way. Jesus shows you the way. Jesus is the way. So the definition of way means a method, a style, a manner of doing something. You do it a certain way. And to be a disciple of Jesus in that time meant in Hebrew thought that you literally took on the discipline and lifestyle of your rabbi, of Rabbi Jesus in particular. And this is what these disciples had done. They had lived with Jesus. They had learned from Jesus. He gave them the words they would literally use for their prayer life. He gave them power so that they could begin to heal others. He gave them the philosophy by which they would live. And now he was giving them something else. It would be a way, a road, a path, a particular track that would lead them where they would never have considered before, a place they could never have imagined. In his book about the I am sayings of Jesus, Rob Fuqua says that the entire Bible actually was leading to this week. And that Jesus in his own form is trying to help us be reminded that in Genesis, we were in a place of Eden, a place called paradise. It was a great place to be. And then we veered off that ground. We went from a garden path to a destructive path. And so God's next move biblically was to give us the law. And the law was really supposed to give us the way to live. But again, we wandered from the law. We made our own laws. Again, another path of destruction. And then God in the Bible gave us judges, and God gave us prophets. The prophets would come along and say, this is the word of the Lord for you. And a few listened and a lot did not. Again, wrong road, wrong way, exile, captivity, another dead end road. And then in the fullness of time, there's Jesus. Not just a word, not just a person, but God's very Son saying, I am the way. My Father has been trying to put you on the right road since the beginning of time. Follow me and I'll get you there. Not lost, but found. Not false, but truth. Not death, but life. Has Jesus put you back on the way? Anne Lamott is a wonderful Christian writer. She's written some novels, some nonfiction books, and she wrote an autobiographical book called Traveling Mercies. In that book, she describes how she came to know who Jesus is in her life. And before that, she would tell her personal story of her daily routine. Her daily routine looked like this. She said, I'd put my morning coffee on, I'd take a run, I'd shower, more coffee, maybe some speed, something like 1,000 cigarettes, she said, and then I'd try to write. That was in general her work week. On her weekends, her Saturdays and Sundays, she would spend these at the flea market. And sometime around her 30th birthday, she discovered she was pregnant by a man that she had really just met, who was married, and someone she didn't really want a life or a baby with. And so in telling her story of faith, Anne was at one of her weekend flea market sprees, and she hears gospel music coming from the church across the road. The building was in shambles, she said, but the music was so amazing, she had to kind of stop and listen, and she worked her way over there. She had remembered some of these hymns from when her grandparents used to take her as a church as a little child. And she could hear this music, and it would be a choir, just 6 people, and a little congregation of 30. She said when she got there was a warm feeling that filled the place. And during the greeting time, people would come over, try to hug her, maybe shake her hand, and scripture was read, and then the minister would preach. She said that she returned to that church about once a month, always loving the singing, even about Jesus, but she would leave before the sermon. She continued going here and there to that church, and she realized that the singing was truly genuine. It wasn't performance. It was, as she called it, music that was breath and food. And whatever inside of her had been stiff and rotting, it would feel soft. It would feel tender. But she always left before the sermon. She said life continued. She published some books, and they didn't sell well, and she didn't have much money, and she didn't feel like she had the wherewithal to bring a baby into the world. So one morning, her friend took her to get the abortion. After which she describes the feeling of sadness where she has never been so sad in her entire life before or since. She went home with her Bushmills whiskey, some codeine that the nurse had given her. She drank till nearly dawn, and she did the same thing the next night, and then the next night, and then the next night, and then the next night. She stayed home all week, smoked dope, got drunk, tried to write a little. And on the 7th day, she said she started bleeding. She should have called the doctor, but she was too wasted to do that. And so she laid in bed, and she was shaky and sad until finally the bleeding stopped. And this is what she said happened. After a while, as I lay there, I became aware of someone with me, hunkered down in the corner. I actually turned on the light for a moment to make sure that no one was there, and of course, there wasn't. But after a while, in the dark again, I knew beyond any doubt that it was Jesus. I felt him as surely as I felt my dog lying nearby as I write this, and I was appalled. I thought about my life and my brilliant, hilarious, progressive friends. I thought about what everyone would think of me if I became a Christian, and it seemed utterly impossible. Simply could not be allowed to happen. Turned to the wall, and I said out loud, I would rather die. I felt him just sitting there with patience and love while I squinted my eyes. And then she said she fell asleep, and in the morning he was gone. After that experience, Anne Lamott says she had a feeling that everywhere she went, someone was following her. And a week later, when she went back to church, she was no longer she was so hungover she couldn't even stand up for the songs. But this time she stayed for the sermon, which she said at the time was ridiculous, like someone trying to convince her of the existence of extraterrestrials. But during the last song, she knew she couldn't escape. She said like the people were singing as if they were weeping and joyful all at the same time, like their voices or something was wrapping their arms around her and holding her in the bosom of like a scared child. And she began to open up to that feeling, and it washed over her. She cried. She left after the benediction and raced home, but the presence stayed with her until finally she writes, under a sky as blue as one of God's own dreams, I opened the door to my house. I stood there for a minute, then I hung my head and I said, okay, I quit. You can come in. This is my beautiful moment of conversion. I am the way. The word way filled my thoughts this week. Of course, it means a path. It means a road. It means a specific journey, one that gets you where you need to be. The book of Acts describes people who follow Jesus to be people of the way. But I also started thinking of some other definitions of way. There's a whole colloquial dictionary out there that came to mind for this word. And about 15 years ago, people would start speaking of things as being way cool. Do you remember that? If you meant it was way cool, it wasn't just cool, it was way cool. That means if you put way, it had more emphasis. It just meant more. I mean, really. Something could be cool, but then it could be way cool. I imagine this had to do with what the disciples felt maybe when they were following Jesus that day when he turned water into wine. That was way cool. Or that day when he was teaching and then all these people were hungry and he broke the bread and fed 5,000 people. I imagine that wasn't just amazing, it was way amazing. Or this journey that led them to some other things, like the day he was in a Pharisee's house and a woman came along and she started weeping and then she knelt at his feet and she dried his hair with his feet with her hair. That had to be way radical. And as the journey progressed and the opposition became stronger, imagine the confusion in the garden, the arrest, way wrong, way messed up. The next day, Jesus would take a walk with a crossbar on his shoulders down a road in Jerusalem called Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering. And it was only after the resurrection, I think, that John, who gives us these I am statements, could put it all together. Yes, he is the way. He and others who are following Jesus, along with Anne Lamott and others who can testify, would learn what God is really doing for us and what God is really doing with us. This Holy Week, we're going to take that journey of faith together. It got passed on to us, and we will once again have singing. We're going to share a meal. We're going to get the words of finality, a cross, a tomb, an end for sure. And one could think that this is truly over, that this rabbi, he was really good and all. He had a few followers. It was nice for a few years. It came to a terrible, terrible ending. And one could ask, can anything good come from this? No way. But we, with Thomas and Anne Lamott, we who have known him, who have seen him, who have felt him, who have lived with him in our lives, our point of reference will be faith, and our experience will shout it. Where I come from, we'd say, yes, way. Are you on this way?